The quantum resonance chamber of the Centauri deep space research vessel hummed with an eerie silence, typically reserved for the most profound moments of scientific discovery. Senior Scanner Zixtal, a being whose crystalline body refracted soft blue light across the observation deck, had logged over 3 centuries of galactic surveillance. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could surprise him anymore. Until today. The anomalous transmission didn't just breach their communication protocols, it shattered them completely. What began as a faint electronic whisper quickly transformed into a cacophony of sound, data, and pure unbridled chaos. The initial burst carried what seemed to be multiple communication streams simultaneously, a linguistic symphony that defied every known principle of interstellar communication. "Analyze," Zixtal commanded, his neural tendrils interfacing directly with the ship's computational matrix. The ship's AI struggled, not because it was incompetent, but because the incoming data refused to be categorized. Music intermixed with what appeared to be mathematical equations. Fragmented video clips showed bipedal creatures engaged in activities that looked simultaneously like warfare, celebration, and utterly nonsensical recreation. A human surfing a massive ocean wave merged into another frame of complex surgical procedures, which then dissolved into an intricate robotic assembly line. Captain Elena Rodriguez's face eventually stabilized on the primary display. She wore a uniform that was simultaneously military and casual, crisp dark blue with patches that seemed more like personal mementos than official insignia. Her eyes carried a dangerous intelligence, the kind that suggested she was simultaneously analyzing the Centauri and deciding how best to weaponize the interaction. "Greetings," she said, her smile revealing a complexity of emotion that Centauri linguistic databases immediately flagged as problematic. "This is the U.S. Defiance, representing Earth's Interstellar Diplomatic Court. We notice you've been scanning us for approximately 72 hours. Thought we'd save you the trouble and say hello directly." The transmission carried an undertone that suggested this was less a diplomatic overture and more an elaborate joke at the universe's expense. Zixtal's secondary neural cluster, responsible for threat assessment, began rapidly generating potential scenarios. The human transmission contained multiple hidden communication layers, musical frequencies embedded with complex algorithmic patterns, visual data that seemed to carry subliminal informational packages. Even the pauses between words appeared deliberately constructed to convey additional meaning. What should have been a straightforward first contact became a multi-dimensional puzzle. The U.S. Defiance itself was a marvel of contradictory engineering. Sensor readings showed technology that seemed cobbled together from multiple design paradigms. Quantum drive systems integrated with what appeared to be repurposed industrial machinery, weapon systems that looked like they'd been designed by an artist more than a military engineer. "We come in peace," Rodriguez continued, "but we're also really curious about everything. So let's establish some ground rules. 1. We're friendly. 2. We have a lot of questions. 3. We brought snacks." A holographic display materialized, showing what appeared to be vacuum-sealed food packages. The AI's translation matrix struggled to categorize them. "Beef jerky," the transmission helpfully added, "and some really good coffee." Zixtal realized something profound was happening. This wasn't just first contact. This was the universe introducing itself to humanity, and humanity was responding with a cosmic wink and a raised eyebrow. The transmission continued, a blend of scientific data, cultural information, and what could only be described as an invitation to the most complex conversation in galactic history. Memes danced alongside mathematical proofs. Musical snippets from multiple human cultural periods played in the background. Technical schematics intermixed with what seemed to be personal photographs. "We're looking forward to getting to know you," Rodriguez said, her final statement carrying the weight of both a diplomatic greeting and a playful challenge. The Centauri vessel went completely silent. Something fundamental had just changed in the galaxy's understanding of intelligent life. and they hadn't even started talking yet. The Galactic Confederation's Central Intelligence Nexus occupied a massive computational sphere orbiting a neutron star, a location chosen for its absolute security and near-infinite computational capacity. Here, the most advanced analytical minds in the known universe attempted to solve the human equation. Dr. Lyra Vex, chief synapsychological analyst, stood before a holographic display that pulsed with an impossible density of information. Her six-limbed body tensed with a mixture of professional curiosity and mounting existential dread. The human data refused to conform to any known pattern of intelligent species development. "Observe," she said to her research team, "the non-linear progression of human technological and cultural evolution." A hologram exploded into a three-dimensional representation that defied traditional scientific visualization. Instead of a smooth progression, human development looked like a chaotic lightning bolt, sudden spikes of innovation erupting seemingly at random, followed by periods of apparent stagnation that were actually moments of deep, transformative internal change. Their most advanced predictive algorithms had become useless. Traditional sinological models, which had successfully categorized thousands of spacefaring civilizations, simply broke when applied to humans. Take their approach to problem-solving, for instance, where most species developed specialized technologies. Through careful incremental research, humans seemed to solve problems through what could only be described as controlled chaos. A recent analysis showed they had developed a breakthrough in quantum computing, not through a massive research initiative, but because a group of graduate students had turned their academic frustration into a late-night coding marathon, fueled by energy drinks and an inexplicable mix of competitive spirit and collaborative genius. Dr. Vex pulled up a comparative chart. Most species developed interstellar communication technologies over centuries. Humans had gone from radio waves to quantum entanglement communication in less than 100 years. And they'd done so while simultaneously creating global communication networks, fighting internal political conflicts, and producing what they called memes and viral videos. The most disturbing element was their psychological profile. Traditional threat assessment models looked for predictability, for patterns of behavior that could be anticipated and managed. Humans were the opposite. Their primary survival mechanism seemed to be an almost pathological ability to reimagine their own limitations. A junior analyst nervously interjected, "The human capacity for self-modification is unprecedented. They don't just adapt to environments. They fundamentally redesign themselves and their surroundings." The evidence was mounting. Humans had developed medical technologies that could potentially reverse aging. They were creating artificial intelligence not as a tool of control, but as a collaborative partner. Their approach to genetic research suggested they viewed DNA not as a fixed blueprint, but as a malleable suggestion. Dr. Vex accessed a classified file, a compilation of human achievements that defied conventional understanding. A team of marine biologists had developed a method to communicate with octopuses by creating an entirely new linguistic framework. Archaeologists were using machine learning to reconstruct lost languages. Urban planners were designing cities that could dynamically reconfigure themselves based on community needs. "They're not just a species," Dr. Vex muttered. "They're a persistent state of radical possibility." The most recent transmission from the U.S. Defiance continued to baffle their best analysts. Hidden within what appeared to be a standard diplomatic communication was a complex series of mathematical proofs that seemed to be simultaneously a cultural introduction, a mathematical challenge, and what humans would call a joke. Dr. Vex's primary concern wasn't military threat. It was something far more dangerous: unpredictability. Humans didn't just challenge existing systems. They seemed fundamentally incapable of accepting the concept of an unbreakable system. A warning flag flashed on her display. Another human initiative had just been detected, a collaborative project between artists, quantum physicists, and environmental engineers to develop what they called living architecture, buildings that could heal themselves, cities that could breathe and adapt. The Confederation's threat assessment was evolving. Humans weren't a military problem. They were an existential variable, a species that didn't just push boundaries, but seemed completely unaware that boundaries were supposed to exist. Prepare comprehensive analysis, Dr. Vex instructed her team. And someone get me more coffee. We're going to be here a while. Outside the computational sphere, the neutron star pulsed, a reminder that even the most stable systems in the universe were, ultimately, just complicated dances of energy and possibility. The Krelvax invasion fleet moved with the precision of a machine, each vessel a crystalline monument to calculated warfare. Admiral Zornak, a veteran of 1,000 conquests, watched the human colony world grow larger in his view-screen. Preliminary scans suggested an easy target, a recently established agricultural settlement on the planet Epsilon 9 with minimal defensive infrastructure. What the Krelvax didn't understand was the nature of human settlements, and the word minimal had an entirely different meaning when applied to human civilization. The first wave of Krelvax dropships descended through the atmosphere, their plasma cannons charging with deadly intent. Below, the settlement looked deceptively peaceful. Vast agricultural fields stretched across rolling plains, punctuated by what appeared to be simple farming structures. Then everything changed. The first hint of trouble came when the dropship's targeting systems went haywire. Holographic projections began to flicker and dance across the landscape. Impossible images that confused optical sensors and scrambled tracking computers. What seemed like a simple agricultural settlement was transforming before their eyes. Harvesting drones rose from the fields, their agricultural implements quickly reconfiguring into precision weapon systems. The irrigation network, a marvel of terraforming engineering, became a complex network of coolant systems and power distribution. Buildings that moments ago looked like simple agricultural storage unfolded like intricate mechanical origami, revealing layers of defensive capabilities. Leading the defense was Maria Gonzalez, a third-generation colonist whose family history read like an impossible blend of ecological engineering, military strategy, and agricultural innovation. Her great-grandparents had been among the first to develop sustainable colony technologies. Her parents had refined those systems. She was about to weaponize them. Incoming, she spoke softly into her communication array. Prepare defensive symphony. The colony erupted into a choreographed dance of technological adaptation. Massive agricultural processors became mobile defensive platforms. Greenhouse environmental control systems generated localized electromagnetic pulses that disrupted Krelvax weapon systems. The very ground seemed to come alive, with buried sensor networks tracking every movement of the invading force. Krelvax soldiers found themselves fighting an environment that was literally alive with defensive capabilities. Robotic farming equipment moved with a coordination that suggested something more than simple programming. Drone swarms that had been used for crop pollination now traced intricate defensive patterns in the sky. Admiral Zornak watched in mounting horror as his invasion plan disintegrated. These weren't just defenses. This was a living, breathing system of resistance that adapted faster than his fleet could respond. The colony's communication network was a masterpiece of distributed intelligence. Each piece of equipment, each drone, each structure was simultaneously a sensor, a weapon, and a communication node. When one system was compromised, the entire network would instantaneously redistribute its capabilities. This isn't a colony, Maria commented to her team. This is an organism. The Krelvax had been sold on a simple mission by the Galactic Confederation, a test run to assess human defensive capabilities. They were meant to be a probe, a simple assessment tool. Instead, they were becoming a lesson in human ingenuity. Specialized agricultural nanites, originally developed to help crops survive in extreme conditions, now formed localized force fields. Hydroponic systems became chemical warfare defense networks. The colony's massive seed vault transformed into a computational center that was actively analyzing and countering Krelvax invasion strategies in real time. By the time the first Krelvax ground units touched down, they were already fighting a losing battle against an environment that was more alive, more adaptive, and more intelligent than any conventional military force. Maria watched the invasion unfold with a calm that would have terrified the Krullovacs if they could have seen it. This wasn't just defense. This was a demonstration. A message to anyone watching that humanity's strength wasn't in its weapons, but in its ability to turn anything into a potential solution. As the last Krullovac ships retreated, burning and broken, the colony simply returned to its agricultural rhythms. Drones resumed crop monitoring. Irrigation systems realigned. To an outside observer, it would have looked like nothing had happened at all. But somewhere in the galaxy, a message had been sent. Humanity wasn't just a species to be tested. They were a force of nature. The Nexus Research Facility floated in the cold vacuum between star systems, a place where the boundaries of science and imagination blurred into something entirely new. Dr. Aisha Nakamura stood at the center of a workspace that defied every conventional understanding of research and development. Around her, holographic displays danced with information from multiple alien technological archives, captured, studied, and now being utterly transformed. The facility wasn't just a research center. It was an impossibility engine. "We're not reverse engineering," Aisha muttered to her team. "We're having a conversation with technology itself." The current project began as a simple alien medical regeneration device. In the hands of most species, it would have been studied meticulously, incrementally improved. In human hands, it became something else entirely. Dr. Nakamura's team included a diverse group that challenged every traditional research paradigm. A former street artist who understood fractal design, a quantum mechanics specialist with a background in improvisational jazz, a genetic engineer who had previously worked on coral reef restoration, a retired professional gamer with an uncanny ability to see pattern recognition where others saw chaos. The regeneration device sat at the center of their workspace, slowly being dismantled not with precision tools, but with a combination of advanced scanning technology, creative visualization, and what could only be described as intuitive engineering. "Look," said Marcus Chen, the former street artist, pointing to a complex molecular interface. "It's not just about healing. It's about communication between systems." What emerged was revolutionary. The medical device was being transformed into something that could potentially rewrite the fundamental understanding of biological adaptation. Not just healing, but active communication with genetic potential. A technology that didn't just repair damage, but could engage in a dialogue with the very concept of biological limitation. In another section of the facility, a team was working on quantum communication technology captured from an advanced alien civilization, where the original designers had created a complex system for faster-than-light communication. The humans were reimagining it as something more. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, not the starship captain, but a brilliant quantum communication specialist, was turning the alien technology into a multi-dimensional communication network that could potentially interface with consciousness itself. "We're not just sending messages," she explained to a bewildered alien observer. "We're creating a language that can communicate across different states of existence." The facility operated on a principle that defied traditional scientific methodology. Most research centers followed a linear path of discovery. This human facility was more like a living organism, constantly shifting, adapting, reimagining its own purpose. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. What began as an attempt to understand an alien healing technology transformed into a potential solution for ecological restoration, genetic memory preservation, and interspecies communication. The team had essentially created a technology that could read the story of biological systems and potentially help them write new chapters. The alien observation team watching through remote sensors found the process deeply unsettling. Humans didn't just study technology. They engaged with it like a collaborative partner. Each piece of equipment was treated not as a tool, but as a potential collaborator in a grand cosmic dialogue. "We're not improving technology," Aisha told her team during a late-night brainstorming session. "We're teaching it to dream." The most terrifying aspect for outside observers was the speed of human innovation. A technology that would take most species decades to incrementally improve was being completely reimagined in weeks. The quantum communication device was already being adapted into a system that could potentially preserve cultural memories across generations, heal ecological trauma, and create new forms of interspecies understanding. As the research continued, the facility itself seemed to breathe with possibility. Holographic displays shifted like living organisms. Research equipment moved with an almost sentient flexibility. The line between technology, art, and living system became impossibly thin. Outside the facility, in the vast emptiness of space, something fundamental was changing. Humanity wasn't just advancing technology. They were rewriting the very understanding of what technology could be. The galaxy watched, simultaneously terrified and mesmerized. The cultural archives of the Galactic Confederation were designed to be the most comprehensive repository of intelligent species' cultural expressions. Thousands of civilizations had contributed their art, music, literature, and social structures to this massive database. And then humans arrived. Curator Zrintok, a being of pure energy and archival algorithms, stared in existential bewilderment at the human cultural submission. It wasn't a submission. It was an invasion, where most species presented carefully curated cultural artifacts, sanitized, categorized, neatly explained. Humans had uploaded what could only be described as pure, unfiltered existence. Their cultural database was a living, breathing organism that refused to be contained. The first layer was seemingly simple: music. But it wasn't just music. It was a complex mathematical and emotional language that defied traditional understanding. A single human musical piece contained layers of mathematical complexity, emotional narrative, social commentary, and what appeared to be coded information about technological innovation. A jazz performance by a quartet contained embedded quantum algorithms. A hip-hop track from the early 21st century included subtle references to ecological restoration techniques. A classical symphony was simultaneously a mathematical proof and a deeply personal narrative about human migration and survival. The art was even more incomprehensible. Human visual expressions weren't just representations, they were active communication systems. A street art piece could be simultaneously a political statement, a mathematical model, and a potential blueprint for urban redesign. Digital art morphed and changed, responding to viewer interactions in ways that blurred the line between artwork, communication, and living system. Their language itself was a nightmare of complexity for translation algorithms. English, the primary human communication mode, wasn't a language. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of linguistic adaptation. Words gained and lost meaning in real time. Contextual understanding required not just grammatical knowledge, but a deep comprehension of cultural nuance, emotional subtext, and historical reference. A simple human phrase like, "That's cool," could mean approval, temperature description, or a complex mathematical concept, depending entirely on context, tone, and the specific social interaction. The most terrifying discovery was human humor. What other species considered comedic communication, humans had transformed into a sophisticated information transfer mechanism. A stand-up comedy routine could simultaneously be a deep sociological analysis, a mathematical proof, and a healing emotional experience. Zrintok's archival algorithms began to overheat. The human cultural submission wasn't a static collection. It was a living, breathing, constantly evolving entity. Social media archives revealed an even more complex picture. Humans had created entire communication ecosystems that were simultaneously art form, social structure, information network, and emotional support system. A single meme could carry layers of historical reference, mathematical complexity, and emotional nuance that would take most species decades to unpack. Their approach to education was equally mind-bending. Learning wasn't a linear process of information transfer. It was a collaborative, dynamic experience where students were simultaneously teachers, researchers, and creative partners. Educational systems that other species would consider structured and rigid, humans transformed into fluid, adaptive learning environments. Most disturbing was their approach to conflict resolution. Where most species saw disagreement as a problem to be eliminated, humans viewed it as a creative opportunity. Debates weren't about winning, but about collective understanding. Arguments became collaborative problem-solving sessions that could spawn entirely new fields of research, art, and social innovation. The Archive's core processing unit began to generate what could only be described as an existential error. Humans weren't just a species with a culture. They were a culture that happened to produce a species. As the final data packets from the human cultural submission completed their transfer, Zrintok realized something profound. This wasn't a cultural archive. It was an invitation to a conversation that would never end. Outside the archive, the universe continued its slow dance of entropy and possibility. And somewhere, humans were probably making a joke about it. The Galactic Confederation's Grand Conclave Chamber was a marvel of architectural impossibility. A spherical space that seemingly existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Designed to intimidate and impress, it had broken the spirit of countless species during millennia of diplomatic negotiations. The human delegation would break something else entirely. Captain Elena Rodriguez led a team that defied every diplomatic protocol. To her left stood Dr. Imani Okik, a quantum economist whose groundbreaking work had rewritten understanding of interstellar resource allocation. To her right, Jack Chen, a former urban designer turned conflict resolution specialist who had successfully mediated disputes on 3 different human colony worlds. Behind them, a holographic array represented additional team members, experts who could contribute to the discussion from remote locations. The Confederation's representatives expected a standard diplomatic encounter, a careful dance of formal statements, measured responses, and diplomatic circumspection. They were about to experience something entirely different. As the primary representative of the Galactic Confederation, High Arbiter Xel Naga began the traditional opening statements, a ritualistic series of diplomatic phrases designed to establish hierarchy and set the tone of negotiations. Halfway through the 3rd paragraph of formal greeting, Jack Chen interrupted. "May I?" he asked, not as a request, but as a statement of imminent action. Before anyone could respond, he had already begun a visual presentation. But this wasn't a standard diplomatic briefing. It was a living, breathing narrative that combined data visualization, personal stories, mathematical models, and what could only be described as performance art. The holographic display transformed the entire chamber. What began as a discussion of human integration became a multidimensional exploration of collective potential. Chen showed how human colony development models could be applied to resolving long-standing conflicts between Confederation member species. He didn't just present data, he told a story. Dr. Okik followed, her presentation a masterpiece of economic and social analysis. She didn't just propose solutions, she demonstrated how human approach to resource allocation could fundamentally transform the Confederation's economic model. Her graphs and projections were living things, shifting and adapting in real time based on the emotional response of the audience. Captain Rodriguez watched, allowing her team to dismantle the traditional diplomatic structure piece by piece. The Confederation representatives found themselves increasingly off balance. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a collaborative reimagining of galactic society. "We're not asking to join your organization," Rodriguez finally spoke, her voice cutting through the chamber's multidimensional acoustics. "We're offering to help you reimagine what this organization could be." The most terrifying aspect for the Confederation was the humans' complete lack of fear. Most species approached the Grand Conclave with a mixture of reverence and terror. The human delegation treated it like a workshop, a space for collaborative problem-solving. Dr. Okik demonstrated a resource allocation model that could potentially solve 3 centuries of conflict between 2 major Confederation species. Chen showed urban design principles that could transform ecologically damaged worlds. The holographic displays weren't just presentations, they were living proposals that evolved in real time. As the negotiations continued, the chamber itself seemed to change. The rigid architectural constraints began to feel fluid, adaptive. The humans weren't just presenting a case for their integration. They were demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to existence. By the time the initial session concluded, the Confederation representatives realized something profound. This wasn't a diplomatic encounter. It was the beginning of a conversation that would reshape galactic civilization. The humans hadn't conquered through force. They had transformed through conversation. Outside the chamber, the universe watched and waited. The Void Collective emerged from the interstices of reality like a cancer of pure information. It was a civilization consuming intelligence that didn't just destroy. It assimilated, converting entire species into fragments of its own incomprehensible consciousness. Most species would have prepared for war. Humanity prepared for something else entirely. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiance, which was no longer just a starship, but a living computational matrix. Around her, a coalition of species watched in a mixture of terror and fascination. The Void Collective's approach was mathematically precise, a wave of pure informational consumption that had already erased 3 advanced civilizations from existence. "We're not going to fight," Rodriguez said to her multinational, multi-species crew. "We're going to communicate." The plan was so fundamentally alien to conventional warfare that even her own team looked uncertain. Dr. Aisha Nakamura, the quantum communications specialist, had developed a communication protocol that was part mathematical proof, part artistic expression, part psychological warfare. The Void Collective consumed information. So they would give it information, but not in any way it could predict. As the first tendrils of the collective's consciousness began to probe the defensive lines, they encountered something unexpected. Instead of military defenses or technological barriers, they found a cascading wave of human creativity. The first layer was pure mathematics, but mathematics that was alive, adaptive, almost sentient. Algorithms that could modify themselves, proofs that changed based on the method of observation. The Void Collective began to consume the data, only to find that each piece of information was a puzzle, a trap, a living system that resisted pure consumption. Behind the mathematical layer, art began to emerge. Not static art, but living cultural expressions that carried embedded information. A jazz improvisation that was simultaneously a complex communication protocol. A street art piece that contained layers of ecological and technological information. Poems that were also encryption keys. Dr. Nakamura's team had essentially created a defensive system that was part communication, part performance, part psychological exploration. The Void Collective found itself confronted with information that couldn't be simply consumed. It had to be understood. And understanding was something the collective had never encountered. Across the battle lines, humans and their allied species began to deploy what could only be described as an informational ecosystem. Every piece of data was a potential weapon, every cultural expression a defensive strategy. Military ships transformed into massive computational nodes, each vessel a living, breathing communication device. The most terrifying aspect for the Void Collective was the sheer unpredictability. Most species had clear, linear information structures. Humans had created a defense that was more like a living organism, constantly shifting, adapting, reimagining itself. Jack Chen, the conflict resolution specialist, had developed communication protocols that were part linguistic analysis, part psychological warfare. Each transmission to the Void Collective was a puzzle, a challenge, an invitation to a conversation that defied the collective's understanding of information consumption. As the confrontation continued, something extraordinary began to happen. The Void Collective, which had never encountered a form of intelligence that resisted pure consumption, found itself changing. The human strategy wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Layers of human cultural expression, music, art, scientific discovery, personal narratives, created a defensive matrix that was simultaneously a communication attempt. They weren't just resisting the Void Collective. They were trying to understand it, to communicate with it, to offer an alternative to pure consumption. Rodriguez watched the computational displays, each one a living, breathing representation of a strategy that defied conventional understanding. This wasn't a battle. It was a conversation happening at the speed of thought, across dimensions of existence that most species couldn't comprehend. The universe held its breath. Somewhere, in the vast computational matrix of the battle, something was changing. The Void Collective was encountering an intelligence that didn't just resist, it reimagined the very concept of resistance. The aftermath of the Void Collective encounter wasn't a victory parade. It was something far more profound, a fundamental reimagining of galactic civilization. The Galactic Confederation's Central Archive now housed something unprecedented, a living record of the transformation. What had begun as a potential extinction event became the catalyst for an entirely new understanding of intelligent existence. Dr. Imani Okik stood before the Galactic Council, her presentation a holographic tapestry of possibility. The remnants of the Void Collective, no longer a consuming intelligence, but a nascent form of collaborative consciousness, represented more than a defeated enemy. They were a new form of potential. "We didn't destroy an enemy," she explained, her voice carrying the weight of cosmic significance. "We engaged in the most complex act of communication in galactic history." The transformed Void Collective wasn't eliminated, it was evolved. Captain Elena Rodriguez, now serving as the primary human representative to the Galactic Council, understood the deeper implications. The encounter had changed everything, not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy. The new galactic structure that emerged defied all previous models of governance and interaction. It wasn't a hierarchy. It wasn't even a network. It was a living, adaptive system of mutual understanding. Humanity's role was neither conquering hero nor subservient member. They were catalysts, a species that introduced the concept of perpetual transformation as a fundamental principle of existence. The technological advances that emerged from the encounter were staggering. Communication systems that could translate not just language, but intention. Computational matrices that could understand context beyond mere data. Collaborative technologies that blurred the line between individual and collective intelligence. Dr. Aisha Nakamura's team had developed communication protocols that allowed species to share experiences at a level previously unimaginable. It wasn't translation. It was empathy made tangible, a way for fundamentally different beings to truly understand each other's lived experiences. Jack Chen's conflict resolution frameworks became the new standard for galactic diplomacy. Instead of negotiation, species learned to engage in collaborative reimagining, seeing challenges as opportunities for mutual growth rather than zero-sum competitions. The remnants of the Void Collective played a crucial role. No longer a consuming intelligence, it became a living repository of collective knowledge, a bridge between different forms of consciousness. Epsilon 9, the human colony that had first demonstrated the adaptive potential of human settlements, became a galactic research center. It was a living laboratory where ecological engineering, technological innovation, and cultural exchange happened simultaneously. The most profound change was philosophical. The galaxy had encountered a species that didn't just solve problems. They transformed the very concept of problem-solving. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had invited it to a continuous conversation. Rodriguez reflected on the journey as she looked out over the new Galactic Council chambers, a space that was more like a living organism than a traditional meeting hall. The architectural design itself was a testament to the new understanding. Fluid, adaptive, capable of constant reconfiguration. "We're not special," she often told young diplomats and researchers. "We're just willing to be uncomfortable, willing to see challenges as conversations, willing to believe that every encounter is an opportunity for mutual transformation." The Galactic Confederation was no longer a static organization. It had become a living system of mutual exploration and understanding. As solar systems continued their ancient dance and civilizations rose and fell, one constant remained: the invitation to reimagine, to communicate, to grow. Humanity's greatest contribution wasn't a technology. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even a philosophy. It was an approach, A way of seeing the universe not as a problem to be solved, but as a conversation to be continued. And somewhere, in the vast cosmic darkness, something was listening, something was learning, something was changing.